Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome back. This is episode 44. And today we are talking about character alchemy, crafting complex characters. I'm Donna Carbone, and I am joined by Hope Gibbs. Hi, Hope.
Hey, Donna, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
You know, Tennessee, at the beginning of April, we had a lot of interesting weather. I know there's that whole analogy of, spring. I think it's April showers bring May flowers. And if that's the case, there are going to be so many flowers. We've had a lot of rain, but also, unfortunately, a lot of tornado warnings and actual tornadoes. And so it's been a little crazy month.
Yeah, that's scary. Tornado warnings, we have those here as well. Not recently, but we've had 2 tornadoes touch down in the town next to us. And those are scary. Those are so scary.
They are. And in Tennessee, because of our ground, because there's a rock underneath us, a lot of people don't have full basements. I don't have a basement. I couldn't because of where my house is. So for us, it's, you have to find the most interior room of your house, hopefully with no windows and near a bathroom. So so it's just, part of spring, but I do love this time of year. I love seeing the flowers bloom and the trees here in bloom, even if there's pollen. I love this time of year.
Yeah, me too. My tulips are coming up now, and I'm loving that. Absolutely loving it.
Yeah, our tulips they started a little bit earlier than yours, and the azaleas are already gone. But or in the beginning of April, it's just stunning.
Are the azaleas gone already?
Yes, our azaleas, they bloom quick down here. I mean, it was the beginning of the month. It was 90 degrees one day. So, I mean, so things are grow a little faster here.
Yeah, I think the highest we've seen so far is about 70.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, should we get to it? What are you reading these days?
So I just read this book. It's called Blind Spot with Maggie Smith. And you remember Maggie was so wonderful. She came on our show back in the summer of 2024. I loved talking with her because she's, a podcaster too as well. And you and I have both been on her podcast. And it's really to feature debut novelists. And as you and I both know, any publicity, any leg up you can get when you're a debut novelist is important. And so I read this, and it's a psychological thriller, a little bit different than her first book. And I was hooked. I read it. Literally, I started it one night and I was finished with it by the next morning. I couldn't put it down. I wanted to know. It's about a DA, and she's a single mom, and she's a high-powered lawyer, but she gets stalked by this person and you can't figure out why. And Maggie gives you little breadcrumbs along the way. And so I highly recommend it if you're just looking for a great, who is the stalker? Where's this story going?
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah,
I love your first book. I haven't read this one yet, but I'll definitely put that on my TBR for sure.
In her first book, I got to say, the cover for that first book is one of my favorite covers. It's stunning.
Yeah.
So what are you reading?
So I am reading The Last Road Trip by Jennifer Klepper. Jennifer Klepper is one of our pub sisters. She's with Read Adapt, and in fact, she is my mentor. She has helped me a lot along the way. And so I read her first book and loved it. I haven't started this one yet. It's next up on my TBR. I've been reading an arc by Christina Consolino called The Marriage Debt. And I just finished it. So I'm in the process of writing a review for her, and then I'm going to start with Jennifer's book. So yeah, I'm excited. I highly recommend The Marriage Debt as well. It's about a woman who is perimenopausal and just like the changes in her body, everything that's going on. So that's due out May 6th, I think.
Oh, well, I will
Yeah.
have to check that out. And I've also got The Last Road Trip on my Kindle as well, because Jennifer was not my actual mentor. But before I
Mhm.
even signed with Redadept, before I even sent my query to Redadept, someone had connected the two of us together, and she was instrumental in getting me with the WFWA. Loved her first book. And
Yeah.
I got to say, I'm going to go back to the graphic. I
Yeah.
love this cover. It just, I
Yeah.
don't know, Redadept, they've always done great covers. I've always thought that, but I
Yeah.
really think in the last year or two, they have just even stepped it up even more.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to dive in because this book is about friendship, which my first book is about friendship, and
Yeah.
it's about a group of friends who take a road trip and something in their past has happened, and they kind of have to address it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ooh, that can't wait for that. And that's kind of like my
Yeah.
second book. It's a group of friends on a trip. So,
Yeah.
okay, Donna, what is this? What is this episode?
So we're going to be diving into how to create complex and authentic characters that your readers will either love or love to hate. We haven't done a writing episode in a while, so we thought we would really dive into characterization.
Okay, well, let's
Yeah.
start.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, and we've talked about this, we actually have an episode about creating backstories for characters, and I'll link that in the show notes. But the first thing is to develop a rich backstory and to maybe do that with a timeline, identify key moments, pivotal things in their lives, and really to kind of think beyond the plot. I know that when I do it, I call it my character dossier, and it has everything in it. I probably spend the most time creating backstories for my major characters. What about you?
I definitely, in my first book, my second book, I do have backstories, but I didn't go as crazy as I did with my first book, because my first book, the backstory was what I was writing and I was doing all the
Mm.
telling. But I realized that, I had 20, 30 pages just on my main character. But when things got down the road, and because I was what we would call a pantser, I was just writing from just,
Yeah.
with no, outline. Whenever I created a situation, I knew how my character was going to react because I knew her so well. Like
Hmm.
knowing, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, like her fears, what motivated her.
Yeah.
You're not going to actually put that in the page, but it helps you push along your story.
Yeah.
So again, I also, would identify key moments in her life, especially because she did have trauma and her
Hmm.
relationships. And those little details, like we said, they may not show up actually on the page in the word itself, but in the essence and how you're
Yeah.
telling the story.
Yeah, it's all about how well you know your characters. One of
Yes.
the things that I like to do is create like a day in the life, and do like from the moment my character gets up until the moment they put their head on the pillow, just exactly how they go through their day. And that just, and you never do that in a scene, that would be monotonous. But just to kind of know the different, yourself, like the different routines that you have in the
Mhm.
morning. If something is off routine, that could set off your whole day. So, really, to kind of get that real deep knowledge of who that
Yeah.
character is and how they go about their day is so important.
Yeah. And again, that backstory, it was pivotal for me. Like I even knew how my main character's ex-husband's family acquired their wealth. I had a whole backstory on people that never showed up in the book,
Right.
but it also gave me that I was familiar with their story and it was always in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
So another tip is to embrace flaws and contradictions. This is something that I did. I did do a pro and con list, kind of the strength and weaknesses of my characters. And again, that helps with the choices. And you can also show contradictions. Donna, talk about some contradictions with your characters, because that's what makes characters rich.
Yeah.
The things that they do, it makes no sense, but it does because it makes them human.
Yeah. In my first book, Lynn, the main character, is seemingly very put together on the outside. And her friends all see her as having the perfect life, being the perfect mom. She was a teacher before she had kids. Um, and so they hold her to this pinnacle, but inside she doesn't feel like that at all. And that really comes through in the book. And I think it's important to have that tension because, people see other people, characters very differently on the outside than, we feel inside ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's important to really show that because that's what creates tension. That's what makes your character three-dimensional. And it's what makes you love your character, hate your character. I remember one book that I read, it was Barbara Conry's first book, Nowhere Near
Near
Goodbye.
goodbye. Uh-huh.
Yeah, Nowhere Near Goodbye. And I remember so vividly the main character in that book is a doctor. And she was just on this mission to find out about this disease that had killed her friend when she was younger. And she really kind of put her family in the background.
Yeah.
They were secondary to the choices that she was making to the detriment of her marriage. And I remember thinking, I love this woman for her perseverance, but I can't stand her because as a mom, she really wasn't tending to the needs of her child. And I
Yeah.
kind of foresaw a conflict in their marriage because she wasn't tending to the needs of her husband. So, but that's what made the story so rich is that, this is the main character of the story. And there were times that I absolutely loved and admired her, and times that I thought, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And the more we can elicit thoughts and feelings like that in our readers, the more they're going to be able to connect to these people, to these characters as real people.
Yeah. You don't want to make your protagonist perfect because no
Yeah.
one can relate to that.
Yeah.
So another thing is to avoid cliches. You
Mhm.
need to dig a little deeper into why they have these flaws, and also about unique traits and their mannerisms
Mhm.
that will, make your character stand out. And it will also reveal an aspect of who they are, and maybe from a past wound. And I did that with my character. Her first instinct whenever something would happen to her was to run. And
Mhm.
she was literally a runner as well. And I know running sometimes can be a cliche, but for her, it was what drove her. Whenever she would come across things, instead of stand up for herself or to maybe fight back, she always ran. She always just kind of gave up. And
Yeah.
that also gave me an opportunity to write something, give her agency, give her an opportunity to be different from the beginning of her story to the end of her
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So,
And with my book, All That Is Sacred, I have 5 characters. And so finding unique traits and things that set them apart from each other was instrumental. And
mhm,
so I really had to create just these little nuances for each of the characters that were distinguishable.
yeah,
And that's so important when you have many characters in your story. And it could be the smallest thing, like one character twirls her hair when she gets nervous,
yeah.
something like that, um, really kind of helps create the essence of the character.
Yeah, I'm doing that now because with my first book, I could really focus on Penny, but my second book, it's a group of 5 women,
Yeah.
and you have the one person in the group that she's the planner.
Mhm.
She on the outside, her world looks perfect, and everyone depends on her, but she's the one who's about to break in the story. And then you just little mini mannerisms. I have one character that she is relying a little bit too much on medicine, and maybe her nightly glass of wine is turned into 2 or 3, and those little
Yeah.
things, but not just to make her one dimensional. I go into what is going on, and she realizes it. So
Right.
those are some things that to think about with your characters.
Yeah,
Another
I think
thing.
I just want to, can I just interrupt you
Yeah,
for 1 minute? Because you just said something that I think is so important is helping, like knowing the backstory will
yeah,
help you understand these things, like why
mhm,
that character is relying on wine to like decompress at the end of her day or when she runs into some kind of conflict. So these things are very much tied together.
yeah.
Even like you said, if an incident doesn't show up in the book, you need to know what brought her to this place.
Exactly, or him
Yeah.
as well.
Or yeah.
So now let's focus on internal conflict.
Yeah.
Sometimes it helps to ask, what does your character want?
Mhm.
And what do they need? Because this is where it can get really exciting because this can be in conflict with what you want and what you need. And that really heightens the emotional tension. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, just like personality traits, we're not all perfect. People can see things superficially on the outside, and inside, very different things can be going on. Um, and just like that, we have to address the conflict. And conflict comes from the constant pull between what you want and what you really need. And so we have to honor that within our characters as well. And you're constantly wanting tension in every scene. There
Yeah.
needs to be like, and this actually feeds into the next thing, but there needs to be a goal for every scene. And if you don't have a goal for every scene, it's going to fall very flat, and readers are going to get bored with what they're reading.
Yeah. And when you have an editor, the first thing they'll say is,
Yeah.
what does this scene do? Does it
Right.
make the story go forward? Because I wrote so many scenes that I loved and I thought they were great,
Yeah.
but if I took them out, the end was still there. It didn't help make the story go further.
Right.
Another thing is that you highlight tough choices. You got to
Mhm.
put those characters in a situation where they have to choose, and oftentimes it's a difficult option. And you can also help move this forward, also with some internal monologues, showing them trying their conflicting thoughts through this.
Yeah.
So that's something that you've got to put for a story. You have to put your character. It doesn't have to be life changing. It doesn't mean that it's life or death, but they need to be put in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. I like to use internal monologues myself. I like very stream of consciousness writing. So, and that deals a lot with internal monologues. And so my characters are constant. There's always at least one character that has internal monologues
Yeah,
throughout. And so you're really kind of tracing their thoughts, how they move back and forth from want to need.
yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing is to be distinctive about their motivations and their goals.
Yeah.
Set yourself some clear objectives. Why does this character want this? Explore a little bit their deeper motivations. Think about why that goal matters. And I love this, the emotional need, does it fulfill?
Yeah.
And then allow just evolution as the plot progresses. Let the motivations kind of change
Yeah.
because of where you put your character.
Yeah, we need to see growth in the character, and that happens over short-term goals and long-term goals. There's a writer, her name is Lisa Crone, and she wrote Wired for Story and Story Genius. And so I highly recommend her book for both the wants versus needs and the motivations and the goals. I think her background is in psychology. And so she goes in really deep about these two things and how to identify someone's goal, their motivations, their conflicts. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final graphic I'm going to pull up is another thing that you can help develop these characters is by showing relationships
Yeah.
and their reactions. I mean, so show how they act differently with friends or strangers, or, in some cases, their enemies. And you can use dialogue and body language because you let that behavior subtly convey emotions and attitudes. Why don't you talk about these first two, and then we'll come back to the next points?
Sure. One of the things I use when I'm teaching my creative writing class for this very thing is as an exercise, to create dialogue with your main character with different characters who are, of different kind of stations in their life. Someone that they know very well, very familiar, to someone that they just meet. And I think in creating exercises like that, you begin to see the nuances. And if you don't see the nuances, if they're communicating with somebody familiar in the same way that they're communicating with somebody they don't know, then you're not doing your job. You really need to hone in on the way that a character interacts differently with different characters in the story. And
Yeah.
so just by doing like a little dialogue sketch, I usually have them do it about the same kind of thing. Maybe like they both went to see a movie and, what their thoughts were about the movie and how they would interact with another character about that.
Yeah. For me, just the way a character talks also brings
Yeah.
them to life. I've been known to go over dialogue
Mhm.
out loud in the shower,
Mm.
and people will hear me talking, and they think they don't know who I'm talking to, but I am talking as my character. And
Yeah.
in my book, Where the Grass Grows Blue, because it was set in Kentucky, I could have a lot of interesting characters just through the way that they talk. And you want to make sure that your characters are speaking. If you're writing a historical fiction novel set
Mm.
back in the 1500s or the 1600s, they're not going to speak the way that we do today. Just like
Yeah.
my characters in Kentucky are not going to speak the way that you do in Connecticut. And you can really flesh out your characters through dialect and, just the way that they speak. And you want your characters to sound, so to speak, differently on the page.
Yeah. And that goes back to, making your characters unique. Like all of these things that we're talking about with you today work in tandem. Like you
Yeah.
layer these things into your characters and, one doesn't really work without the other.
They don't.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the next 2 points is reveal what they notice in the setting. This can be the telling of personalities or feelings about giving place. And then here's a great part, highlight growth. How do these
Mhm.
relationship challenges, how do they challenge them and how do they change over time?
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely something that you want to do. Even in the beginning stages of a book is kind of plotting out the different, kind of where you want your character to be at different stages in the story. Um, and, like in terms of like going back to the dialogue and the body language just for a minute, um, when I have long strings of dialogue, when I write my first draft, so much of it is dialogue.
Yeah.
And it, like you said, that you say the dialogue out loud, I hear it in my head. Like I hear the conversation going
Mhm.
back and forth and I write it out. Um, but one good trick also to introduce body language is when you're having a back and forth conversation without exposition to add in some body language. So instead of saying, Lynn said, you can have Lynn's line, and then you could say, Lynn folded her hands and put them on her lap. And so that will also vary your writing up a little bit. It'll clarify who's speaking in a long conversation. And it will also give you what Lynn's mannerisms are, based on a conversation
Yeah.
that
Well,
she's
you're
having.
you're showing, you're not telling. So
Right.
if Lynn was upset, I wouldn't say Lynn said angrily. That's a no-no. But I could
Right.
say Lynn crossed her arms
Right.
and arched her eyebrow. That can tell you that, little things like that. And that makes the reader more invested because then they're
Yeah.
starting to use their imagination instead of me telling you Lynn is angry. You're like, oh, she didn't like that comment. So
Yeah.
that's something to be thinking about. So we're getting ready to wrap this up, but we want to talk about because you did this, Donna. You were great. I think because you're our teacher. You were talking about some examples of well-developed characters,
Yeah.
and so I thought we could go over a couple of them. So, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to start with Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger
Yeah.
Games. And I'm going to start with her just because I think our audience probably is very familiar with that
Hmm.
character. And I notice also when I'm reading craft books, they use Katniss's character often as like a model. So she was one of the ones that I chose. And her complexity is that she's strong and protective, but she struggles with vulnerability and emotional intimacy. And the takeaway is that her internal conflict is survival versus morality, and that adds depth to her choices.
Okay, she is one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
I read The Hunger Games when my children were in that age bracket. Um, they ended up not reading them. I did. Now they did watch the movies, but she is one of my favorite characters, and it's
Yeah.
because she is a complex character and she has been written beautifully.
Hmm.
Another one is Jay Gatsby.
Yeah.
So my mother was an English teacher, and
Mhm.
she loved this book. And when I read it, and I hate to say it, when I read it in 10th grade, I didn't understand. I was like, okay, whatever. It was better than some of the books that we read. So I read it about 2 years ago as an
Mhm.
adult and absolutely saw it.
Yeah.
I saw the point of this book, and I love it with Jay Gatsby. Jay Gatsby, he is driven by love and ambition, but he is blinded by idealism. And the takeaway is his contradictions, hopefully yet secretive, creates a character who is both admirable and tragic, and he is. And then I watched the movie starring Robert Redford. I think that one is the better of the Great Gatsby book. I mean, no offense to Leonardo, but no, but he is such an interesting character.
Yeah. Yeah. Tyrion Lannister, speaking of watching, is another character that I used. He is in the Game of Thrones, if you don't know, which is one of my all-time favorite series. Um, and he is like such a complex character because he's funny, he's intelligent, he's the guy that you kind of want to be friends with and hang out, but he is also motivated by approval of his family. And so he rebels from his family. He is filled with so many complexities. His constant state of conflict makes him the ultimate complex character who readers love to love, but they also love to hate. Like there are times in that show or in the book series, if you've read the series, that you absolutely love Tyrion, and then there are times that you can't stand him.
Yeah. Ironically, when I was getting ready for this podcast, I turned on HBO
Mhm.
and it was on. It was season 3, and it was when Tyrion finds out that must marry Sansa.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's kind of ironic that this is on. Okay, we have time for one more because we
Okay.
were going a little delayed, and I'm going to let you choose because we've written about, I think, maybe 7 or 8 of these, and they're going to be in our show notes, and we're going to
Yeah.
post on Instagram. But give me one last one that you really want to touch on.
Okay, so last one, Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. She's smart and independent, but her pride and quick judgments often lead to misunderstandings. And her growth comes from recognizing her own flaws, not just others. And so she's a really good example of a character who you can see that arc through the whole story. She's very immature in the beginning. She's very like quick tongue in the beginning, and she really kind of makes that transformation into someone who can see her own growth.
Yeah. Okay, well, I hate to wrap this up. I think we could go honestly another 30
Yeah.
minutes on this subject, and we may revisit this in a later date.
Yeah.
But real quick, before we leave, what is our due now for this episode?
Okay. So our do now is a group of exercises that deal with character development. We have a free download for you, which will be on our show notes. You'll have to go to our website, I think, to download them. But there's about 6 different exercises that you can do, and you can take any character from your novel and put them through these exercises to really learn to know your characters better.
Yeah. And as always, everyone, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, and we're on Instagram as well. And you can find what Donna was talking about on our website at authorstalkingbookish.com. And real quick before we go, why don't you tell us about our next episode, which is, again, very much in how to help you write?
Yeah. We are going to, well, we put together a group of our favorite writing resources. And so we're going to talk about writing resources on the path to writing, publishing, and marketing. So you're going to want to tune in for that one because we have a list that's 2 pages long. Not that we're going to go over all of them in the episode, but you can get a free download of them. And we would love it if you could like and subscribe to our podcast.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.